let's make sure I can share my screen while we're at it. First of all, good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us. Let's see what we can do here. Perfect. Before we start, I want to share a library of links. So just let me do that quickly. I'm going to grab a link for you guys. Hold on. Let's get this document for you.
As Rabbi Berkowitz is doing that, please use the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat the entire time. You can ask questions, even if he doesn't get to your question. Following the presentation, there's going to be a Q&A, and we'll take the questions that are asked during the class first in order to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask. So please don't feel bad if you can't get unmuted. You're welcome to, you can even send them as a private message to me, to Rabbi Yisrael Bernath, and I will make sure that the question is asked. I will ask the question for you. So you can be anonymous, or you can be as not anonymous as you can. We want everyone to be able to learn as much as absolutely possible from this evening's program. We're really excited to be able to present it and be able to have everyone here to join us. We also have some special guests that are going to be joining us this evening, so we're excited for that as well. So without any further delay, Rabbi Berkowitz he just shared in the chat box a number of links that will help you navigate tonight's session a little better. Rabbi Berkowitz, it's yours.
All right, let's do this. So let's share that screen. Here we are. All right, so let's, I want to see a few of you at least while I do this. Okay, Rabbi Bernath, is our technical setup good? Can everybody see everything? Nothing's blocking?
Looks amazing. I'm just going to make you a little bigger, but that looks great. Everybody can see you perfectly. Once again, the chat box below, you can use it and interact.
Okay, so the format for tonight is I have a little presentation we're going to do. We're going to start off with a little bit of history and then move on to the current day. And I just want to say very clearly at the beginning, I'm going to be presenting a mixture of facts and opinions. And since we're all here adults, right, and we've learned the skill, any facts presented are, facts that I've researched or learned through my own, adventures in the Jewish world. I'm expecting that for some of those facts to be challenged. It's actually why I brought on certain people to be here from different perspectives. And I'm very happy, Rabbi Bernath, Rabbi Tzvi, and is Mindy Polak, has she logged in yet? I sent her a link. I'm just want to make sure she's here. Mindy, are you here?
But our mayor is
here. Okay, Mindy's here. So, and Mindy lives in Outremont and knows much more about it than I do. And I'm expecting some of my facts to get corrected, and I'm very happy for that to happen. And or people to ask questions in the chat and to challenge things based on what they know, and that's how we get to the truth. So that's always a great thing. And any opinions presented are my own. With the opinions that I'm giving tonight, it's just I'm not representing anything official or an official position of any organization, even my own organization or the different places where I work or the movements that I'm part of. The opinions that I'm giving, and it's really important to note this, it's my perspective. It's the way I see things. I expect other people see things differently. The only reason why I'm delivering, this, I'm leading this conversation tonight, I just happen to have seen things from two different perspectives, as the inside perspective and the outside perspective. So that helps a little bit. So anybody here who's, as far as the relative to the Hasidic world, anybody here who's coming from an outside perspective, I've been there too. And I know what that's like, and I know a little bit what the inside's like, and I can kind of, live on both sides of the divide. So, that's just my perspectives, being where I come from. That's actually how we'll start the presentation. Who am I? So I'm Rabbi Yehoshua Berkowitz. A lot of people know me as Rabbi Josh. Growing up, I was Josh. I grew up in a traditional, but not necessarily religious household, maybe a little bit more traditional than my peers. I went to Jewish day schools, JBPS and Bialik, lots of fun memories there. And all four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and I lived very close to my mother's parents, and so that's kind of a big part of my background. I have a very diverse kind of Jewish family, extended family, from Hasidic to secular and everything in between. So I've gotten to know quite a few different areas of Judaism from my family, which is a little bit more of an inside perspective. When I was 16, I became observant. The vehicle for that was studying Jewish metaphysics. Specifically, if anybody here is from Montreal, I was very close with Rabbi at the Montreal Torah Center, who was a great teacher. And I was into Eastern philosophy and religions and all kinds of different stuff in those days. I was a pretty wild teenager, at least in my mind. And Jewish metaphysics is what brought me closer. So about a year after that, when I was 17, I left Vanier, my studies in music and science, to go to yeshiva, which is a Jewish parochial school, a seminary for men. Did that for a long time, about 7 years. I did my rabbinic internship in Berlin. I got rabbinic ordination, and then I came back to Montreal and got a master's degree in educational psychology from McGill, which was really helpful in helping me prepare for this, anything that I teach, this presentation included. I currently live in NDG. I have a wife. I have 3 kids. I don't have a dog, but I do have a SCOBY. This is my kombucha. Anybody who knows what that is. And I'm part of the Chabad NDG Jewish Community Center. We're on Sherbrooke and Hampton. We don't bite, we're very friendly, and you can always come by and say hi. At least, post-COVID, we hope. Or even, on the street and say hi. And I hold the distinction of probably being the world's only rabbi who has both wrestled and figure skated before entering the rabbinic profession. I think I'm the only one. If anybody knows anybody else, please let me know. I'd love to meet him. Joining us tonight is Mindy Pollack. This is Mindy. You can tell by the arrow. Mindy is great. Mindy is amazing. She's one of my favorite people, and I'm absolutely overjoyed that she was able to come tonight and join us. I just wanted to give her a few minutes to introduce herself to all of you.
Hi, everybody. I am very pleased to be joining you tonight. Thank you for inviting me. So about me, well, I got involved in politics because of a synagogue that was renovating on Hutchison Street. They wanted to expand, to build an extension in the back. They're the shortest building on the block, and renovate a little bit. And they were approved. Their plans were approved by the city, but because they're an acquired right as a synagogue on a residential street, the neighbors were able to have a say in the project and eventually managed to block it. There was a referendum, and during this whole process, my neighbor at the time, Lila Marshy, got involved because she couldn't believe that people were going door to door and campaigning to block this project, and she decided she can do the same thing that they are. And so she knocked on everyone's door and tried to get everyone involved. And that's how we met and founded Friends of Hutchison, which is an organization that tries to build bridges, talk to people, and get people to realize that we're all living in the same neighborhood. We all have to get along, and we have to figure out how to make it work. Very short story, basically. I don't know how much time you want to give me, Rabbi Berkowitz, but so that's basically how I got involved as an engaged citizen. And then in 2012, a city councilor from Plateau Mont Royal asked me about running for office, and I wasn't thinking of that at all at the time. I had never pictured doing that ever. And I decided that I had an opportunity to make a difference, and I didn't feel that I could say no. So I ran for borough councillor in Outremont in 2013, won my seat, but was elected without a team, unfortunately. And so after 4 years and another referendum and lots of drama, I ran with the team that you see on the screen, and 4 of us were elected this time, including the mayor, Philip Thompson, on the left there, and my wonderful colleagues, Fanny Magini and Valerie Patro. And so we have 4 of the 5 seats on council right now, and we've managed to make some changes, important changes, but progress is slow, and there's always something happening. There's always, people trying to take an issue and sensationalize it, and we keep dealing with that. So COVID hasn't helped much with that, unfortunately. The spotlight was on us in the spring, and there were some wonderful silver linings as well, with the pastries that the neighbors were distributing to each other, and the wonderful singing of the balcony prayers that were appreciated by people. So so that brings us up to now. So voila, I am the female Hasidic borough councillor, and that's a short introduction to me.
All right. Am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Perfect. That's amazing. Mindy is going to be joining me for the Q&A session, which will be at the end, and that can continue however long it continues until I, just pass out from exhaustion. So I'll stay as long as you stay, as long as I can keep my eyes open for a Q&A. I don't mind, and Mindy as well. As long as she is willing to stay to do that. And also, Mindy has the unique Rabbi Tzvi as well, and Mindy can jump in anytime and interrupt me if something needs to be challenged briefly. That's totally cool with me. I also want to, I believe Mindy, by the way, is the first Hasidic woman to be elected to office in North America, which we'll talk about actually later on in this presentation. We're going to mention the first Jewish person who was elected to office in the entire British Empire ever, happened right here in Quebec. Little known story. We'll get to that a little bit later, and it's history, so it's cool. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Ashkenazi Jewish history, because that's where the Hasidic movement, that's where Chassidim come from. They're a subset of Ashkenazi Jewry. Where does Ashkenazi Jewry come from? That is a very complicated question. There's a separate class I've given on it, and nobody really knows the answer. There's genetic testing, there's historical, studies that have been done, and there's conspiracy theories involving, a nation that converted en masse. Is that where Ashkenazi Jews come from? Are they descended from? It's a really complicated subject. We're not going to be able to touch on that, from 1,000 years ago. It's way beyond the scope of this class. But let's just understand and assume for a second, somehow, some way, this group identifying as Ashkenazi Jewry ended up here. About approximately 1,000 years ago. This is during the Dark Ages. Things are a little bit complicated. So here I have a little line which is separating this is the axis which is separating the 2 sides of Ashkenazi Jewry. Here you have Western Europe, and here you have Eastern Europe. And just like there's a big divide between the Western Europe and Eastern Europe, they're very different. So too the Jewish communities, the Ashkenazi Jewish community can be divided into those 2, and that's going to be important for us to understand the different groups and how that works a little bit later. Anything else on this? No, I think that's it. Yeah. Well, there's one more thing. The word Ashkenazi is an interesting word. The word Ashkenazi comes from the Bible, comes from Genesis. It's one of the non-Jewish nations, one of the descendants of the family of nations, a well-known part of Genesis. And originally it was identified with a nation called the Scythians, an ancient nation that started out east here in the steppes and migrated this way, particularly, through where is Ukraine on this map? Russia, Poland, Romania. oh, this is a bit of a, yeah, this might not have it on this map, through Crimea. I think that's around here. So that's one version of the word Ashkenazi, and they ended up in Eastern Europe. So the Scythians, ancient people, you can look them up. And then the word Ashkenazi kind of mutated and changed to refer to Germany, the Western side. So the word Ashkenazi has this original Eastern connotation for Eastern Europe, and then it started to refer to Western Europe. All right, just a little history. Okay, so we're jumping ahead now. Okay, that's how things started, and I'm not going to cover all the history. We'll go back a little bit. I just want to lay out for you the different kinds, the different categories, general categories of Ashkenazi Jews, so we can situate the Hasidic groups in the bigger picture of Ashkenazi Jewry, right? We have to situate that. And it's I designed this myself, a pretty good infographic, right? Pretty cool. I probably missed certain groups, it's not perfect, but this is a pretty good approximation of this is the spectrum, okay, of opinion. If I was going to put a year on this, it would be, the 1930s, okay, before the Holocaust, right? Before everything changed in Europe, before Ashkenazi Jewry was, a large part of it was destroyed. This is the different kinds of groups that there were. And I put them on an axis here of assimilation and insulation as opposites. So the groups that mostly favored insulation means staying separate and aloof and different than Western culture, okay, or European culture, or the culture of the people they lived amongst, right? So on that extreme, on the eastern side of Europe, we have different Hasidic groups, which I'll talk about later, specifically in this order. So you have the most insular on this side, towards less insular on this side. By the way, White Russia, that's not like a race thing. White Russia is, the old term for the European part of Russia, Ukraine and Lithuania and that whole region. Belarus, it's referred to as White Russia. You also have that same kind of insulated philosophy here, Lithuanian Yeshivas Mishnagdik. We're going to explain what these words mean a little pretty soon. Okay, then you have Zionists, a little bit more towards the middle, but towards the left. And then, in Eastern Europe, there were the Bundists, the Yiddishists, and the Socialists, who really believed in total assimilation. They believed that was the route to prosperity, to freedom from anti-Semitism, was through socialism, and they became, supporters of communism. The Bund, that was the socialist Jewish movement, and Yiddish, this kind of leftism was associated with Yiddish writers and Yiddish literature, and they believed in the Yiddish language, but ultimately in assimilation. This is just situating for us in Eastern Europe, where the Hasidic Jews can be found on the map. And then you have Western Europe, where it's a little bit different. But in Western Europe, you have, let's go back here, you have the Maskilim, the Enlightenment movement, which eventually became Reform, Moses Mendelssohn, if that's a famous name, who were the most for assimilation. Again, Zionist in the same position, kind of a balance. You have modern Orthodox, and then you have the strict Ashkenazi Orthodox. So those are all the different kind of Ashkenazi Jewish groups that you could identify looking at things in the big picture. And this is where you would situate the Chasidim in the big picture of Ashkenazi Jewry. So just helping us place it. And also, very much in the East. Okay, so Chasidim are very much coming from Eastern Europe. There are some Chasidim from Western Europe. For example, actually, my grandmother was from a small Hasidic group in Vienna, Viennese Chasidim, but that's like very uncommon. So the big majority is in Eastern Europe. Okay, so if we look at the big picture, and this is important to understand for today. This is like really key. How were Ashkenazi Jews treated throughout this 1,000 years? So first of all, they were always non-citizens or considered like second-class citizens until Napoleon, the French Revolution. Yeah, it didn't really solve the problem, but it continued well after that. They were expelled, they were brought back, they were expelled, they were brought back. They were not really considered to be at home anywhere. They were not considered to be real citizens like everybody else. However, they were very useful. Ashkenazi Jews were used for connections, knowledge, skills, and money lending. There's different reasons, cultural and religious reasons why money lending and accounting. The first person in Europe to write a book about Arabic numerals and the number 0 was a Jewish rabbi. And it was the Europeans did not use, the really efficient Arabic numerals for quite a while. We're stuck with Roman numerals. The Jews adopted it first. So very useful kind of skills. That's an important skill set when you're doing accounting and stuff. So the wealthy nobles really valued the Jews, and however, the church and jealousy of the common people, of the peasants and the feudal system then, really drove them back. And it was a back and forth. So the pattern that we see is that the Ashkenazi Jews were welcomed in a place and then persecuted by that same government who had needed them, who had welcomed them, and like this back and forth all the time. Prosperity and to the opposite, and prosperity to the opposite. Okay, so now we're going to zoom ahead to the early 1700s. This is the moment when a Hasidic movement, on its own begins to flourish. It starts, and there's a very specific reason why it happens at that moment. This will help us understand the Hasidic movement today, what it's about, and what the people who are part of it are all about, by understanding the problem that it was responding to. So Eastern European Jewry had some serious problems in the early 1700s. Okay, it was not simple. So first of all, there was this incredible poverty for the simple rural Jew. It was a physical poverty, material poverty. People were very poor. Product of the Dark Ages and the feudal system they were coming out of, and a spiritual poverty. People in Eastern Europe, a lot of Jews, they were just very illiterate. They were not well educated. A huge majority were not well educated. And then to make that matters worse, the mostly Lithuanian scholars, the elites, right, the Torah scholars, were kind of aloof, and they kind of neglected the needs of these. They looked down on these simple Jews. They kind of made fun of them. They didn't really. They're just like, okay, they're light-minded people. They're not, they kind of they didn't jump in to help. Let's put it that way. There were also some terrible things that happened. The Khmelnytsky massacres of 1648, the subsequent wars of Ukraine over there ended up wiping out about half of Ukrainian Jewry. And, for other countries around there were also consequences. It was a really devastating. It was like, that was the Holocaust of that era. It was really, really just absolute devastation in the mid 1600s. And then to follow that up, people were desperate, people were losing their minds. And then comes along this fellow Shabbatai Tzvi in Turkey in the Ottoman Empire and proclaims himself a messiah, but he was a false messiah. He was very effective. Shabbatai Tzvi, huge numbers of Jews literally sold all their possessions, moved to a coastal town with their possessions, not working, just ready to sail on a boat to Israel with Shabbatai Tzvi, the Messiah. He convinced a very large number of people that he was the real thing. It was kind of like a hysteria. It was like a really wild time. And then he was arrested. The Turks kind of feared what he was up to. They didn't want this to happen. This whole mass movement of Jews. They were afraid of what he would do. So they arrested him and they made him a deal to spare his life. They would spare his life if he converted to Islam, and he did. And a few people actually followed him, which is wild. But the majority of the Jews were like, oh, that wasn't real. And further spiritual devastation. People like sold everything, ready to go. So in the background of these problems, to solve these issues, that's where the Hasidic movement came. That's where the Hasidic movement arrived. And it's, the Hasidic movement is really older than this, as we're going to see, but this is when it came into the open under the leadership of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, which Baal Shem Tov means the master of the good name. He was born around 1698. I think there's a dispute about that, just like everything else. He was an orphan from a young age. At a young age, he was a very special person. He was, kind of a prodigy, uniquely gifted. And so he joined a secret society of wandering mystics who just went around pretending to be not mystics, pretending to be, simple, ordinary people. But they actually were on this kind of mission to uplift people and to help the simple people, those rural, simple, poor Jews that we discussed earlier. So that was how they worked, but they were secret. They did not let anybody know about their existence. And he became the leader of that group. He inherited the title Baal Shem. There's a few Baal Shem leaders of this group before him. And he inherited the name from the previous leader. And he made the decision that the time was right to expand the movement, to bring the secret society of these mystics into the open and become a public movement. And that's really where the idea of Chassidim as a movement, as a group identity, really starts with Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov. When he started that movement, it was not easy. It's really an understatement. The Jewish people had just experienced the false Messiah, and that false Messiah basically started a cult. And there were a few other kind of real cults that started out of, the people's desperation in the Jewish community. So they figured that here's the next false Messiah, another guy starting a cult. And so the Torah scholars of Lithuania, they also were fed a lot of false information about him and about their practices. And so the name Chasidim actually came from these opponents. So the people who opposed the Baal Shem Tov called themselves Misnagdim, which means the opponents, and they named him and his followers the Chasidim, which means the pious ones. And I guess for them it was kind of with a bitter sense of humor, the pious ones, right? That's the way they said it, but the name stuck. And so, when I say terribly persecuted, I mean people beat up, excommunicated, excluded, and worse. It was for a few generations. This was a real big schism in Eastern European Jewry. You can tell I'm a Star Trek fan. Chassidim, the next generation. I grew up, Captain Picard and all that. So the actual kind of system of different kinds of Chassidim that we see today started with the Baal Shem Tov student, the Maggid of Mezrich, who kind of divided up Eastern Europe into different territories and put a Chassidic master, one of his students, in charge of each of those territories. That's why when you talk about Chassidim today, it's like very geographical. The names of the different Hasidic movements, some examples, Satmar, Belz, Lubavitch, these are all places. These are, and you have the Satmar Rebbe, the Belz Rebbe, and they lived in that town or near that town and the name stuck. And so it's very geographical. Those people created dynasties. So those Hasidic masters, they had very often the next leader, the successor, would be one of their children or sons-in-law. And he would become the next Rebbe. That was the name of a leader of the Chassidic movement, would become, that title Rebbe. I think many Chassidim call it Admor. It's a Hebrew acronym. All right, so now we're going to dig in. If you remember on my earlier chart, my little infographic, we had three different categories of Chassidim. There's like hundreds of different Chassidic groups, many of whom did not make it through the Holocaust and have disappeared. If you go to Borough Park today, in Brooklyn, there's like if you're in Montreal, you may have never seen this. There's just, I don't know how many, an enormous number of little, we call them shtibelach, with little rebelach. That's the Yiddish. Little synagogues with little rebbes who, come from a dynasty, a little town somewhere in Europe, have a few followers, maybe a decent amount of followers, live in Borough Park, and you've never heard of it. And there's a lot of those. There's a lot of little Hasidic groups that just have kind of, survived the Holocaust in small numbers and rebuilt life for themselves in Borough Park. We don't have so much of that in Montreal. We have mainly, some of the bigger well-known groups here, although I could be wrong about that. See if you know differently, let me know. So so it's too complicated to look at every group. We have to kind of zoom out a bit and look at categories. And that's to make this easier and to help us understand what's going on. I've split it into 3 categories, right? 3 territories, 3 solitudes. So we have White Russian Chassidim from White Russia. We have Chassidim from Poland, and we have Chassidim from Hungary. So Chassidim from White Russia are Lubavitch and Breslev, okay? And they share certain things in common. In Montreal today, the Lubavitch community is very big and is one of the larger communities and is centered around Westbury. And there's some schools there and some large institutions, all centered around kind of Westbury and Plamondon. Breslev is centered around the end of Côte Saint-Luc, kind of like Westminster. There is a Breslev synagogue and a community there. Polish Chassidim, and Hungarian Chassidim live mostly in Outremont, with the exception of Tosh, who have their town in Boisbriand. And so Polish Chassidim, you might have heard of Belz, Vizhnitz, Gur, Hungarian Chassidim, and Satmar and Tosh are both Hungarian.
So actually, if I can clarify one little thing that I'm familiar with, being from the Vizhnitz community, it's actually from the Romanian / Ukrainian part of Eastern Europe. So,
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
it's
and not just Poland. It's
yeah, I mean, the truth is the borders over there have changed so much. It's a little bit of a mishmash. I mean, technically speaking, Satmar is in Romania, but they all speak Hungarian. All Satmar, Satmar's Chassidim speak Hungarian and identify as Hungarian Chassidim. So it's kind of like which part of the country. And I think I looked up most, I confirmed most of the cities. I'll look up Vizhnitz again and we can check it out. But yeah, there's all the borders, they kind of changed a lot, and it depends where in the country. Is it close to Poland, or did I get that completely wrong?
I'm not 100% familiar with the map, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't.
Okay, we'll have to check that. Zvi, Rabbi Zvi, can you be our fact checker, or just maybe check on Wikipedia or Google Maps or something? Where's Vizhnitz? And we'll continue. Yeah, so this was hard to do, a little bit of research on life in Europe. This is obviously very general, and I'm just kind of trying to get an idea here, but obviously it was varied and diverse. So White Russian Chassidim, the stories, this is just from the stories and the oral history that I've gotten, because, and what I see, that the Chassidim from White Russia were very spiritually and intellectually oriented people, but they mostly worked as laborers and traders. That was kind of that region. It doesn't, White Russia, it wasn't like big business. It wasn't, big cities. It was very rural, but they weren't country bumpkins. There was a lot of people took advantage of, doing physical labor to free their minds and to be able to really think. And so there's a lot of, that's going to come up later. That's going to be important. Polish Chassidim, probably a great majority of simple people, laborers, people in the rural country. And then there were some really, really, successful business people, very powerful people. The Polish Hasidic community was massive. We don't know how big it was. I believe the pre-war population, Jewish population of Poland, was around 6 million Jews. And that's like the Jewish population of Israel today. So it was a mass. I mean, we've just rebuilt it. It was enormous. And so, yeah, there was a lot, obviously many Chassidim there, and they, as we're going to see later, they did not, that's the next thing, they did not do all of the Holocaust. And Hungarian Chassidim, like all Hungarian Jews, were really, really successful. They were, the majority of Hungary's middle class was Jewish, according to some research that I saw. So, lawyers, doctors, and all that kind of stuff, middle class business, more than 50% Jewish in Hungary. So, very successful. Holocaust or other trauma from that era. So, this is where things kind of, that was life. And then how did things change? How did things come to an end? So for White Russian Chassidim, they ran east to escape from the Nazis, those who were able to make it. And some of them were able to get out again after the war ended. And some of them were trapped under communism, those who lived in Russia, who were stuck there. So the Holocaust did not decimate White Russian Chassidim as much as those who lived closer to Germany. But many of Lubavitch Chassidim, many Breslov Chassidim were stuck in communism, which was a whole different kettle of fish. Polish Chassidim probably got the worst of it. They were systematically destroyed from the beginning of the war, 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, right up until the end. All the concentration camps, the biggest concentration camps, they're all in Poland. When we do March of the Living, which I did go on, it's in Poland. And for 6 years, from the beginning of the war until the end, they were systematically decimated. And, we lost, so much there. We don't even know. And then Hungary had a little bit of a different story. Hungary was invaded very close to the end of the war. And so it was this very fast transition, this very, very quick deportation that happened. This isn't something you can find in a book, but I actually visited Hungary, Budapest, during my time interning in Berlin. And, you ask how many Jews do you think live in Budapest today? If you take a second and think about it, is the same size as Jewish community like Montreal? Is it like Toronto, or is it like smaller, Vancouver? Is it like, the community in Detroit? Like, if you were to compare it to something, you think it's bigger than Montreal, smaller than Montreal? Most people would probably say, oh, there must not be very many Jews in Budapest today. There are 80,000 Jews in Budapest. It's the same as Montreal, about the same. Which is, and while I was there, one of the rabbis who I was sitting with explained to me that, you could have a next door neighbor who's Jewish and they'll never tell you because they still don't trust their neighbors, because the Nazis came in at the end of the war and people turned on them. People turned them in. And there's this like huge community and like people don't want to identify as Jewish in Budapest very easily. He was telling me stories about that. So that's just something I saw with my own eyes. What were the results of this trauma? So what happened? So for White Russian Chassidim, the experience of living under communism, was something that taught them to be defiant against the government and to be individualistic, right? Communism was all about kind of making everybody the same, making everybody believe the same thing. And so there's the idea, and you couldn't organize publicly, for years and years there. So it was the kind of this idea, you have to be your own, you have to be strong on your own. The way the war was fought, right? Communism, they didn't like open concentration camps. They didn't destroy Judaism by, they killed a lot of people, but that's not how they tried to destroy Judaism. That was not the main thing. The main thing was education. They took people and they educated, children the way they wanted them to be educated. That was the challenge. So the fight against communism was philosophical. It was a battle of ideas. And so that trauma taught, White Russian Chassidim to fight with ideas and to fight philosophy with philosophy. It also taught them to focus on outreach, to focus on change, and not necessarily about preservation, because that's what you do with ideas. Is in order for your ideas to survive, you have to spread them. You have to bring people into your ideas to counter the influence of communism. You can't do it just by huddling. It doesn't work. So Polish Chassidim, the trauma of the Holocaust, this idea of trying to preserve and recreate the past through insularity and kind of a collectivist perspective. We're all in this together. We can only trust each other, and it's us against the world. So to a small, probably not to an extreme extent, but to some extent, this is kind of the response to that trauma. I think this is my opinion from what I've been able to observe. And then Hungarian Chassidim, the same idea, but it was so shocking. It was so fast. They were able to see what was going on very clearly. So I think it was the same thing, just a little bit more extreme. So more extreme insularity. And I think we see that today. The only, the Kiryat Tosh, is its own town, it's its own place. And it's, kind of more a higher level of insularity because of that. That's part of that culture of the Hungarian Chassidim, trying to be very, very insular. I couldn't help but do this. So if you want to, this is the slang. Okay, if you want to, we make fun of each other a lot. Chassidim love to make fun of each other. So if you want to make fun of me, I'm a Lubavitcher. You call me a Lubov. That's a pejorative. Nanach, that's how we call Breslov, although that is actually a sect in Breslov or Ruski. I don't know Russian. I'm not sure about that one. Anyway, Tzvi, you're probably the expert in this. You can jump in. Tzvi is like our comedian here. Polish Chassidim, if we want to be a little pejorative, we call them Polisher, and Hungarian Chassidim, we call them hunky. So this is all kind of, inside stuff, little slang. Languages you can see here, there's Polish Yiddish and Hungarian Yiddish, which are really different. There's a lot of Hungarian Chassidim, the old Hungarian Chassidim, they still speak Hungarian, Magyar, which is like an impossible language to figure out, right? And so, but the Yiddish is a very different accent from, the accent I learned growing up. I learned Yiddish growing up. So totally different Hebrew and Yiddish, different pronunciation. Get this thing that keeps appearing out of the way. Hold on. I don't know how to get rid of this thing. It's in the way. Oh, that's annoying. Go away.
There's a little exit thing over there.
Okay, I got it. So we just have to wait, be patient. So this is the important one. How do you identify different kinds of Chassidim based on the way they're dressed? So to look at white Russian Chassidim, so I mean, specifically Lubavitch, I didn't actually do Breslov, I ran out of space. So Lubavitch Chassidim, as we said before, have this like a little bit more perspective on evolving, not just about being insular and preserving. So when they came to America, when Lubavitch Chassidim came to America, they adopted, like I'm wearing right now, Western business attire. At the time, that was a regular suit like we have today. But in the 50s, post-war, everybody was wearing fedoras. Like absolutely everybody was wearing fedoras. Do I have my fedora anywhere? I don't know where it is. Yeah, I've been wearing my Russian hat lately. That too. And only on the Sabbath or holidays or certain special days do Lubavitch Chassidim wear the long coats. Otherwise, it's just kind of like a regular jacket. And the fedora always with the brim down. Very important. Got to be stylish. Yeah, so that was something that we adapted to and changed coming to America. However, Polish Chassidim and Hungarian Chassidim have all different kinds of clothing. I'm not the expert on this. Up hats, so hats with the brim up, different kind of hats, streimels, all these fur hats, amazing. So a bekisha is the long coat, and you might have never seen these things up close, but they are so cool. They have like sick patterns on them, inside, outside. They have they're incredible textiles. They're like very cool when you get up to it. The white socks are amazing. Breeches, things, the old fat, from hundreds of years ago. Incredible. The shoes, I mean, this stuff is amazing. So I love it. And yeah, I just get to wear this suit and a fedora. So whatever. It's easier to find, I guess. But yeah, so every Hasidic group, little groups, there's subtle differences between their clothing. Sometimes if you come from a important person, a Hasidic Rebbe, you have a different Shreimel, which is taller, which is shorter. There's all this kind of stuff going on with the clothing, the kind of pattern that you choose. There's a lot of subtlety there. I'm not the expert in that. I just know that there's a lot going on. and I won't bore you with all those details, but yeah, the clothes are very cool. All right, so let's jump right into Chassidim in Montreal. This is where we get today. What do we talk about today? All right, so
Josh,
yeah, what's up?
quick question.
Sure.
Someone's hand is up, so just wondering if Judith Campbell's hand is up. Are you going to take questions now, or you up for that?
I think it's good if people put questions in the chat, and you know, at the end we can kind of go through them one at a time, or for people who have questions, we can't. I just want to go through the presentation and then do questions at the end, because your question might get answered later. And there's going to, you know, also we want to prioritize, you know, you might have a question now, but be like, oh, I have a much better question later. So write them down, put them in the chat. We're going to have somebody going through and checking the chat for questions. Rabbi Bernath, right, is our Q&A moderator. So yeah, but I don't think it's a good idea to interrupt and do questions. We can get lost in a tangent. And I just want to get through the material so people have got that. And then Q&A, you know, I'll stay as long as I can keep my eyes open, like I said. And maybe Mindy too, if she's able to stay. All right, so Chassidim Montreal, we have to understand the community they arrived in. So the OG Jewish community of Quebec was not Hasidic. It was much earlier. It was like 1700s, and it was British and Sephardic, and it was successful and small, very small community, a few hundred people, but very successful people, very wealthy people, and they were Western European, i.e. British, or Sephardic. So just some interesting people. I think this is just a fun thing. Maybe not a lot of people know, the man considered to be the father of Quebec Jewry, the first real, you know, kind of established Jew, was a very wealthy man, incredibly wealthy man, lived in Trois-Rivières. Aaron Hart, he came from England in the 1700s. Original name was actually Hirsch, which means deer. Hart is like a deer, right? So he anglicized it. His son Ezekiel Hart was the first Jew elected to office in the British Empire. See, Mindy, that's what I was talking about. So in all of the British Empire, the first Jewish person who won an election was Ezekiel Hart in Quebec. And they didn't let him take power. He had to fight because it's an oath and you have to take it on as, you know, you have to say, take it on, you know, with Christianity, and he didn't want to. And then he said, okay, I'll just say it. And they still did, and they didn't let him. It's a whole story. And eventually he was able to get into an elected office when they passed inequality law. A descendant of the Harts, Cecil Hart, coached the Habs, won a lot of Stanley Cups with them in the good old days when the Habs won Stanley Cups. Cecil Hart. A famous Jewish person of the Sephardi side, Avram de Sola. Tzvi is a big fan, right? So you know all about him. I think there's a street named after him. He was the rabbi of the first synagogue here, Sheret Yisrael, the Spanish and Portuguese, which is still around. And he was of his many accomplishments, I mean, unbelievable accomplishments. And he was an eclectic, fascinating person, a lecturer, professor at McGill University, and the first Jew to ever open a US Congress session in 1873. He was invited directly by President Grant, Ulysses Grant. Really amazing person. So these are just people who are examples of what we're talking about. Another famous Jewish person here, Emil Berliner, who invented the gramophone and the record label, was obviously Berliner, Western European. You know, these are obviously famous. There's a museum about him. So that's in Montreal. You can check that out. So summarizing what I said before. Okay, so that's the way things were, and then everything changes. 1900s, persecution in Eastern Europe, and the Eastern European Jews start to arrive here by the thousands, overwhelming number-wise. The Jewish community here tried to help, but it was a culture clash. Some of these people are Chassidim as well. And after World War II, that, you know, things closed, you know, the no Jewish immigration during World War II, very sad, Mackenzie King and all that. One is too many, none is too many. After that, World War II ends and the floodgates open, and everybody comes to North America, right? All the Eastern European Jews, all the Chassidim, everybody comes here. So many stayed in Montreal. They lived in the Mile End, the Plateau. And this is where all the iconic Montreal Jewish foods come from, these Eastern European Jews, smoked meat, pickles, and bagels. These were, you know, the things that we come to identify today. The smoked meatla come from these Eastern European Jews. And, to understand what started happening between the Jewish people, these Jews and the French Canadians, and the clash, the collision of cultures that happened at that time, it's like we can't really imagine it. So unless you were there, if somebody's older and they remember, the 60s, the 70s, the Quiet Revolution, how all that went down. I did link to the document that I posted way at the beginning of the chat. Rabbi Bernath, if you want to repost it for anyone who came later. I'm not following to see if anyone came later, so in case. Yeah, it looks like people did come later. So if you don't mind, Rabbi Bernath, going back and reposting the link, the Google Drive link, I posted the links. The first link there is this article I found, a rambling, and it's full of mistakes. Article, fascinating, shocking, disturbing, from Mordechai Richler about the relationship between Jews and French Canadians, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Just to give you an idea of, how things started to develop until the point where they are today, with Outremer. That's really kind of where it started. Okay, so I'm not sure about this. I would love it if somebody could maybe correct me on this. A little research that I did demonstrated, I couldn't find too much to corroborate it. I even tried looking at censuses. I didn't have time to properly do a full research on this. Was that Outremer was more English before the Quiet Revolution? Let me. Anybody have? Where's the chat? Is that right?
Just based on street names, I guess you could say that's a definite possibility. I'm not 100% familiar with that either, but by the time that I grew up and my parents, I would say definitely, yeah, it's accurate.
Right, that it was an more English neighborhood, well-to-do and everything, and then with the Quiet Revolution and the growth of the of an elite sector of very accomplished people of French Canadian descent, then that Outremer changed then. So it's an interesting thing, right? So you have that happening. You have these Eastern European Jews. Okay, well, let me pull it out here. So the Hasidic population is exploding, right? Large families, recovering post-Holocaust. And so, all kinds of Jews are living there at the time. But with the 60s, with the 70s, there's nicer, bigger homes west. So Jews start to move to the Westbury area. I was reading a book. I have a book here that we found of a sociological study a Jewish fellow did of the Lubavitch community of Montreal. He did the study in the 70s and he recorded, well, first of all, the fascinating story of how the Lubavitch community started in Montreal with a group of 10 students escaping World War II through Japan and ending up here and not getting a very nice welcome. There's a semi-canonical story, semi-apocryphal story that somebody here in Montreal, offered them a lot of money to leave, the first Lubavitch kind of, students to come here, but they didn't. And in this book, he's talking about how, because Lubavitch was a little bit more focused on outreach, that, as people they were trying to reach out to started to move west to the bigger, more comfortable homes. In those days, it was the Westbury area, the Lubavitch community followed them. And, that's where Federation CGA, a lot of the mainstream, the Y, the Bronfman Center, all of those things, that's all, by Westbury in that part, Cote-de-Neige, Snowden area. And that's where the next Jewish migration was. And then it was again to Hampstead, Côte Saint-Luc, and then now today we have all the way out into the West Island. So, we have this big Western Jewish migration happening, people getting into more space, more comfortable homes, more suburbia. But the Chassidim stayed where they were. They did not leave Outremer. They were there from, as refugees when they came, and they stayed put in the Plateau and Mile End and Outremer. Yeah. So there's a conflict here. Okay, there's a conflict. Were Chassidim there first? That's my question. I was asking about the English. Were the Chassidim there first? What do you, Mindy? I mean, were they in Outremer? Is that wrong?
Were they first where?
Like,
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to figure this out. Was Outremer very English, and then people moved there from Eastern European Jews came, and then only in the 60s, the Quiet Revolution, did it become more French? I don't know. I'm not sure. It would be interesting if that was the case. I would love someone to figure this out for me. I wasn't able to ascertain if that's the case. In a documentary I'm going to show later that the author claims that that's what happened. The documentary filmmaker I'm going to put on screen soon. Anyway, I don't want to get stuck in that. Even if it's just interesting, I wasn't sure, and I would love to figure this out. The history of Outremont. Maybe for another time. I wasn't able to work it out in time. If someone has links or information or someone to talk to about this, please send it to me. I think it would be really interesting. But the conflict, and Mindy is front seat. She mentioned it. She kind of referred to it when she talked about her, early days. I remember those days after you were first elected, right? And it was crazy. It was the strictest laws in the world to regulate the behavior of Chassidim were enacted in Outremont. Worldwide, nothing like that existed, and it was messy and it was wild. Those city meetings. I've been to some contentious city meetings. We, in NDG, we also had our own synagogue expansion that got torpedoed by neighbors. I know what that's like. It was really contentious. We had an anti-Semitic city councilor. We dealt with that. But what happened in Outremont was just, on a regular basis was just, so much wilder. And thank God that seems to have settled down, although we can talk about that later. I don't know what's going on lately. Okay, so a really interesting snapshot of this whole relationship between Outremont, French Canadian, Outremont, and the Hasidic community. 1991, a little documentary this guy makes, Shalom Bonjour. Rabbi Bernath, I'm going to try to show little parts of it. Is that okay? Are we cool with that?
If you can, sure. I mean,
yeah, let's give it a try.
When you share your screen, optimize it for video, and then it'll show the video better.
Okay, where do I do that? Optimize for video. All right, well, let's just try it and see what happens. Let me know if this works well.
Ils conduisent assez cavalière, parce que c'est un peu western. Hein? Ils conduisent, ils arrêtent. Quand ils décident de se parler, ils arrêtent là. Là, il est pris là. Puis, fait que ça m'agressait. Quand il fallait parler, il parlait anglais. Ça m'agressait encore plus. Puis il y a tout notre fond, nous autres, notre fond québécois fragile. On sait qu'on intègre pas mal les immigrants. On sait qu'on est menacé. On est une petite goutte dans l'océan nord-américain. Quand on voit des gens qui sont différents, parlent pas le français, donc ça donne des autres qui sont jamais de notre part.
I already knew that the Hasidic presence was disturbing, so I wasn't too surprised to discover that the children are not immune to these tensions. I was pleased to visit Cairb School, an alternative school in Outremont, where a group of students wanted to do a research project on the Chasidim. Their teacher, Michel Rivet, asks them how they feel being neighbors to the Chasidim.
Ça fait drôle de les voir. Je sais pas pourquoi ils ont des boudins.
Ça vous fait quand vous les voyez sur la vie? Moi, ça me fait des choses. Hein? Je pense que c'est parce que je ne les comprends pas. Je ne connais pas assez la religion. Vous autres, qu'est-ce que ça vous fait?
Ben, je les aime pas vraiment à cause qu'ils prennent notre terrain, on dirait un peu.
Look at
Parce
that.
que ma rue, au début, c'était juste des personnes d'Outremont, là, pas juifs. Puis là, à un moment donné, il y a une gang qui est arrivée. Là, ils ont fait des enfants, puis là, il y en a encore. Puis là, ils ont invité d'autres mondes. Puis là, mes voisins s'est rendus tous des juifs, puis toute ma rue. Ils ont toujours des bien grosses familles. Je sais pas, là, ça me surprend toujours. Ils ont toujours genre 5-6 enfants ou des fois plus. Moi, j'habite aussi sur la rue du Rocher, puis il y a spécialement beaucoup de juifs. Il y a 2 synagogues, une en face de l'autre. Je commence à être un peu écœurée quand ça fait à peu près 6 ans que j'habite là. Je veux dire, on arrive là, OK, puis quand il y a des juifs, là, ils s'évitent, ou des fois, ils provoquent le monde. Mais aussi, il y a des enfants de l'école qui les bavent aussi. Ils ne savent plus trop quoi faire. Ils essaient de se défendre par leurs propres moyens. Et moi, à un moment donné, je faisais du porte-à-porte avec une de mes amies, puis on est allé cogner chez les juifs, on s'est répété
les Juifs. Puis là, ben, on a comme, ben, tu sais, on savait pas comment ils parlaient, tout ça. Là, il était marqué sur la boîte en anglais puis en français. Puis on a montré la boîte, puis ils nous ont donné de l'argent. Puis, ben, ils sont comme nous, c'est juste qu'ils n'ont pas la même religion. Ils ne parlent pas comme nous.
So that's one selection. I found that just shocking, right? People are really honest. This is 1991. There's no policing language like there is today. And these are kids, they're adults now. And when I saw this, it just shook me up. If you see it, there's a few other little selections. I think this is just incredible to be able to play, and I hope the quality is okay.
J'étais restée toujours en voisinage très anonyme. Bon, c'est resté comme ça. La journée où on a aménagé, ça c'est quelque chose dont je me souviens, je trouvais ça incroyable. On arrive à la maison, il y avait une magnifique plante sur le balcon, ici à l'entrée, avec une petite carte. Alors j'ouvre la carte et c'était nos voisins qui nous souhaitaient la bienvenue sur la week-end et qui nous avaient donné cette magnifique plante. Ça, je dois dire, ça m'a touchée parce que j'ai jamais vécu cette expérience-là. Je connais pas beaucoup de gens qui encore aujourd'hui ont ce souci d'accueillir un voisin aussi chaleureusement. Moi-même, j'aurais jamais eu l'idée de le faire si un nouveau voisin est arrivé. Ben là, évidemment, quand on se croise et qu'on a eu un premier contact aussi sympathique que ça, on se salue, on se dit bonjour. Il y a quel âge le vôtre? Comment il va? Il y a le rhume, il est malade. Et graduellement, le contact s'est établi, surtout de femme à femme. Le contact est plus facile. Pour devenir un contact de très bon voisinage, je dirais, plus que de bon voisinage, parce que finalement, de tous mes voisins ici, c'est sûrement avec eux que j'ai le plus de contact.
It's Friday afternoon.
So one more selection. So there we see like a really amazing positive experience that this woman has, which I thought some contrast, you know. Now this is the part that gets me the most. This is just unbelievable. After this fellow.
Ça fait penser, je ne voulais pas trop prononcer le mot, mais un peu à des ghettos. Hein? Et je trouve que ce serait malheureux qu'il y ait, me semble-t-il, à Outremont, un ghetto de juifs hassidiques. Hein? Il me semble que, en tout cas, ça ne correspondrait pas, me semble-t-il, aux vœux des Québécois francophones.
Si la communauté hassidique continue à croître en nombre, ça va modifier les rapports entre l'hassidique et toutes les communautés qui les entourent. Mais c'est la majorité francophone qui va supporter ce choc-là et qui va devoir, d'une façon ou d'une autre, dealer avec, soit par ses élus municipaux, soit par les débats. Et donc, il y a le quotidien qui pose des petits problèmes entre les francophones et les hassidiques, mais il y a l'avenir. Et là, il y a sûrement, chez les francophones, la notion d'intrusion. C'est-à-dire qu'Outremont, c'est notre ville, et vous êtes dans notre ville, et vous allez la changer, puis ça sera notre ville.
Moi, je vis à Outremont depuis très longtemps, parce que c'est un mode de vie qui me convient. Ça a toujours été aussi une population quand même assez homogène, et c'est ce qui m'intéresse. Moi, je veux vivre comme ça. Que ces gens-là ne choisissent pas d'aller s'intégrer à leur propre communauté juive, et qui choisissent de venir s'intégrer dans une communauté homogène. C'est leur choix, bien sûr. On est en démocratie, je le répète. Mais s'intègrent.
Tu voudrais les forcer à s'intégrer?
Non, moi, écoutez, je n'ai pas cette prétention.
Pourquoi pas? Alors, c'est quoi? Je ne parviens pas à saisir, ni chez toi, André. Quel est le reproche? Si tu ne sens pas, je ne peux pas te le demander. Si toi, là, ça te fout de rien, tu n'es pas allergique au blé d'Inde. Hein? Qu'est-ce que je suis pas allergique aux acides? Je peux pas t'en parler pendant 2 jours. Mais nous autres, on l'est. Laisse-nous nous exprimer. On l'est. Ça nous agace, ça nous fait mal. On sent que j'essaie de comprendre avec eux. Aide-moi à comprendre ton 50% d'intégration.
Moi, mon exemple éternel, c'est le trottoir. Je veux 50% du trottoir et je veux...
Prends-le.
Je le prends.
Alors, c'est ça. Alors, si chacun prend son 50%, ils prendront l'autre 50%. J'ai plus que ça. C'est vrai. Moi, là, j'aurais vu ces grandes faces blêmes le matin qui me passent à côté, puis s'ils pouvaient me pousser.
Je suis certaine qu'ils vont venir t'aider à déménager.
Je suis certaine.
Dans le Myland, on est une société très multiethnique où je pense
Okay. Well, I'm just shocked every time I see that. People were not afraid to express themselves then. There was no cancel culture. There was not, things weren't immortalized on Twitter. Wow. Just wow. We can leave that for later discussion, but there it is on tape. I mean, it's an incredible, the link is in the document. It's on Vimeo. You can watch it for free. Just like I showed it. I suggest watching the whole thing. It's just an amazing snapshot of 1991, which is now incredible to think that's like 30 years ago. Those are just some little selections I showed you. It's less than an hour, and it's, people really speak honestly. There's a lot going on there. Okay, so before we do the Q&A, in order to talk about the little bit about the Hasidic community today, and also to look at, maybe I want to look at some of the factors that led up to, what precipitated this class, and, was, COVID, which is just, kind of pushed so many things to a breaking point, psychologically, sociologically, and, this whole class was precipitated by a Facebook post talking about, an event that happened on a Friday night in Montreal with police arresting people who were praying and circumvent, and appearing to, break, public health laws. So we're going to get there. And we're also going to hear the other side of the story. And to understand that at all, we're going to use all of the information, all the knowledge we have, and some of the things I'm going to just a format now. I'm going to ask myself questions that, I think you would have, questions that, as the people listening, that I believe are maybe in your mind, because like I said, I've been in your shoes. I grew up a family member, I grew up close to the Lubavitch, the White Russian community, Hasidic community, where I had some relatives, and that was all right. And I ended up joining that community myself. But as a kid growing up, somebody told me, well, you see those guys from Montreal, they don't even think of us as Jewish. They exclude us completely. So I grew up feeling alienated, even as Jewish as I was. So I understand where that's coming from. And so I'm going to try to address some of the questions you might have right on, beforehand. And then after that, we'll hear from Mindy or Rabbi Tzvi, whoever wants to kind of tell the story of what happened inside that synagogue, where all that famous social media came from, those videos, what was going on. And after that, we'll just launch into Q&A. Anything that I haven't answered or anything that's on your mind, we'll do our best. Rabbi Bernath, you might have a big job if people are asking questions to moderate. So let's keep it going, and we'll try to finish the main program. So why are Chasidim so insular? That's, I asked the question, and I'm going to criticize myself. It's a very presumptuous question. Not all Chasidim are so insular. I'll talk about that a little bit after too. There's differences between groups. Lubavitch and Breslov Chasidim are really, really not insular. I mean, I go to a hockey game. I once went to see the Habs a few years ago. I went to see the Habs in New York, because Islanders tickets are really cheap. And there's a bunch of other Hasidic families, Lubavitch families, sitting with us. I mean, not so insular, not at all. Lubavitch Chasidim live all over the world. We have centers all over the world. We have an outreach center here in NDG. We have in all 50 states, all 10 provinces, and I don't know how many countries, I've lost count, Africa, all the continents, and, Rabbi Bernath, who I work with, Hasidic rabbi, he's like a social media expert. And I included some amazing videos of him and the work he did, including Food of Outremer, the Cheskis, and, with Maddie Matheson, Vice TV. It's on that link document. You can watch it for free. Kosher Love, an amazing documentary on CBC that was nominated for a Canadian Screen Award for Best Documentary. Also there, you can watch it with Rabbi Bernath, and not so insular. But definitely there's many Hasidim who are, and all the different groups, right? So as we've discussed, and let me pull up my notes here, just help me follow along. Yeah, here we go. So as we've discussed, this is, it's a philosophy, not of conceit, not of, we're holier than thou and can't talk to you, but a kind of idea, philosophy of preservation being the number one value. We want to stay like we were. We want, this is how we recover. This is how we rebuild after the Holocaust. And it's a weird thing to do as an urbanite, as a person who lives in a city. Most, Tush did it. Curious Tush lives in the country and they have their own little town. Even there, they have a lot of issues. It's like they have to, when I'm there, it's like, oh, they have to watch the entrance for people to come and bother them. And they have like people watching, and it's not, I've seen it. It's they're not left alone, even though they live in their own little place. Yeah. So for Chassidim, it was all about many Chassidim was all about rebuilding, and the way to do that was to, circle the wagons, and it's that idea of preservation. But that being said, based on what we saw in that video and some of the things we've discussed, some of the history, it takes two to tango. Okay. I've been to New York. I've been to, you can go to, different communities have all their different shtick, different things going on. But there's a big wall in Montreal. There's a big wall in Outremont. And it's not just because of one side, as we saw in that video. I think that there's a lot of people in the Hasidic community who are ready to have better relationships, but they don't feel that they're going to be accepted. I think a lot of the people who are the decision makers now of the Hasidic community in their 50s and 60s, I think if you ask them when they were kids, you saw that discussion with the kids, oh, they attack us. And then the other kids like, well, we kind of provoke them. They're defending themselves, right? There's a lot going on there. I don't know who started it, and it doesn't matter. As anybody who works in education, it doesn't matter who started it. It takes two to tango. And I think people in their 50s and 60s probably have memories of kids of being made fun of for, the way they looked, and being made fun of or being beat up. I've spoken to people who told me, yeah, I got beat up when I was a kid by my neighbors. And that has an impact. And, there's still a lot of people with the attitudes you saw in that video, the lady sitting around the table playing cards, talking about, I should just move out of here. It's our neighborhood. They take over the sidewalk. So I think that has a big part to play. The language barrier is a big part to play, the French and English thing, because you go to other places and, it's the Hasidim are just feel okay being a little bit more open with people. They feel that they're going to be accepted. They still, keep their traditions and preservation. But I think it's a little bit worse in Montreal because of both sides. And we have to think about that. Do Chassidim behave differently than other people? Yes. I'll be honest about it. I think so. This is all my opinion. I think they do. Let's talk about that. So my colleague Rabbi, who's on this call, who's amazing, is a comedian, and he's a screenwriter, and he's a writer, and a news publisher and a news writer. He's just an amazing guy. And he once organized this thing called Frumprov. Okay. So Frumprov is like 50, this is pre-COVID, 50 Hasidic guys or people from all different kind of Jewish communities, lots of Hasidim. We had guys from Tush, we had guys from Outremont, guys from Westbury, guys from Côte Saint-Luc, everywhere, coming, getting in a room and just open mic. And some people are bombed and some people are hilarious. When COVID started, we even did it on Zoom, and we had, we had Zoom versions of it, and that was really fun. And I did a few shticks. One of them was, about virtue signaling, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But one of my shticks was about, what's going on in Outremont. And I don't want to do that yet. Let's go back. What's going on in Outremont? And I'm just like, Chassidim are just New Yorkers with funny hats. All of the issues that get raised, Mindy, think about this, tell me what you think. All of the issues that got raised in these really contentious borough meetings, it's basically if you took a whole bunch of New Yorkers and plopped them down, nothing to do with Jewish or Hasidic, a whole bunch of New Yorkers, you plop them down in the middle of, of Outremont, that's what's going to happen. They're just New Yorkers with funny hats, right? So I have a whole list here, double parking, walking on the whole sidewalk like you own the place. This is like a New York attitude. The school buses. I'm in New York, and the school bus is there, they just like they go like this, they go perpendicular to the street because they're so scared of people not listening to the stop sign and running over the kids. They just like take over the street and then they keep going. It's wild. The attitude, the New York attitude, and the most important thing, something called social capital. Okay, in New York, there's no social capital. It's every person for themselves. Okay, everybody's like every community for themselves. Everyone's just like, leave me alone. It's a big city. It's a jungle. And if you fall, no one's going to help you. That's the attitude of New York. Okay. I mean, we once went there and like somebody stole our license plate. Like, who does that? I'm in New York. I see things. I'm there for a day, a week. I see things on the highway. I'm there for an hour. I've never seen in my life in Montreal. I drive here. I spend, I've driven here for years. I've driven all around Montreal. I see things in 1 week in New York I've never seen in my life. People are nuts. They're nuts there. They're crazy. Okay. And it's just normal because there's no social capital. Nobody cares. The social capital is the expectation that when I do good for society, society will do good for me. It doesn't exist there. Right. And so, it's the New York attitude, no social capital. So Montreal is very close to New York, very influenced by New York. Most of the men, many of the men, probably most of them, the women, you move to where the women live. So the men are a lot of them New Yorkers, Hasidic men. New York attitude. It's not with social capital, this idea of doing good for society. Society will do good for you. It's not expected in New York. It doesn't happen. And if you do it, you'll get run over. So that's just the honest truth about New York. And so maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. New Yorkers with funny hats. It's a theory, Hasidic theory. Okay, next. And obviously the obvious answer, Jewish law, Hasidic culture do have a very different rhythm to life. We saw it with COVID, like Mindy mentioned, with the praying on the balconies. It's like, whoa, okay, like these people stop on Saturday, and they do this like whole thing. And we were just like, whoa, what's going on here? Right? It's kind of otherworldly. It's a different culture. It's a different world. I can't delve into all the details of it, but it's different priorities, right? The idea of having all these children and how you deal with that. It's like, that's the priority. That's what it's all about. That's the focus. Who cares what, how much money you make and what you do for a living and how important you think you are. What matters, is family. It's a huge, huge priority. Do Chasidim smell? Yes. There's something called the mikvah. So one of the customs that the Baal Shem Tov introduced, one of the customs that the Baal Shem Tov, my wife is screaming at me, don't talk about it. One of the customs that the Baal Shem Tov introduced to create Hasidic culture, going back to the 1700s, the idea of men going to the mikvah quite often. Mikvah is a ritual bath. And so, a typical men's mikvah, it's like there's showers, and then you have a pool, and you're in there for a few seconds or whatever, hopefully not too long, and unless you're having a schmooze, and it's pool chemicals. So yeah, sometimes I smell like pool chemicals, chlorine, because I use the mikvah. There you go. There's your question answered. This is just for some comic relief, although it will figure in really importantly to another question a little bit later. The men's mikvah is where things happen. I got a job in the men's mikvah once, guys, a job I still do till today, a little side job I do, got it in the mikvah. It's where all the discussions happen. What happens in the mikvah stays in the mikvah. It's where the news gets passed around. We're going to talk about where Chassidim get news from. The mikvah is the number one source of news, and we'll talk about that when I get to that question. What do the kids learn in school? Do they only learn Judaism? So I work in my son's school. It'll be Hasidic school in Westbury, and it's a really long story with this. Just a very brief answer here. So as I said in the radio interview, if any of you listen to that, like my oldest son is in grade 1. I went to Jewish day school, and actually right near Westbury and Van Horn, JPPS Van Horn, which is no longer there. I'll talk about what it's become a little bit later. So I went there, had a great education, but I see my son, and I'm just amazed by what he's doing in his Jewish studies. He's learning several languages and the grammar and everything that comes with it and all the ideas that come with it. So much knowledge, so much information. It's like unbelievable, memorizing things. And so, but then there was this issue, right? And the issue is like this. So what about secular studies? So in New York, the law is that there's no specific information like in New York in that jurisdiction, for example, about what secular studies means, how much you have to teach. But in Quebec, there is a very specific curriculum. That curriculum is the Ministry of Education curriculum. It's 25 hours a week, and yeah, and it's not possible to wasn't possible for the boys' schools to do that. They weren't able to balance it out. So there's a really cool thing that they're doing now, which I oversee in my son's school, called community homeschooling, that works for everybody. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but so I oversee it in the school, and the boys are learning English and math. I do it with my son. I oversee it. I oversee 200 kids, science, history, and French, all the basics. And we do it very efficiently. And that's where things are at. All the Hasidic schools do that or more at this point. And the girls do a full curriculum, also 25 hours a week. And many of the girls speak French. And yeah, so the.
People want to talk to you.
So okay. Okay, Moif's indicating our Chasidim worldly. All right, we'll leave this for after.
Let's start with the question.
Yeah.
Tell you slowly, you can start moderating.
Okay, yeah. So you know what? Let's take a pause on this, and maybe we'll leave this for a little bit later. Let's take some questions before we launch into the subject and before we get into all this. So, Rabbi Bernath, should we start with any questions? Let me.
Yeah, there's quite a number of questions that have come in already.
Sure.
But I would like to allow people. I think we should go back and forth. We have a couple of people who will be on our panel tonight, answering questions. We have obviously Mendy Palak. We have Rabbi Tzvi Hershkowitz, Rabbi Yosh, who just gave a fantastic presentation, and myself, and there'll be some others that will also be able to answer questions. So I think that's really important to allow people to, so we'll ask. So I think let's get started. We'll go back and forth between questions that are coming in via the chat and having people unmute themselves. So the first question that came in, just in honor, Jews versus Hasidic Jews. Why the clothing of Hasidic? Can't imagine the black clothing of Hasidic clothing comes from the Old Testament. What's the story with the black clothing of the Hasidic Jews?
Yeah, so who said one second, who said the clothing comes from the Old Testament?
No, she said, I can't imagine it comes from the Old
Testament. Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I got
Honey, why don't you come on the screen?
Yeah, funny. She doesn't want to. So the clothing, no, the clothing does not come from the Old Testament, and nobody claims that it does. The clothing comes from, this was the clothing of the noble people. This was like, today, the noble people, nice clothing for men in Western attire is this type of jacket and this type of shirt. In the 50s, the more, the fedora. So in Europe, in Poland, they, the nobles, the formal dress was, the furry hats and the long jackets and the breeches and the white socks. That was considered formal dress. And so the Chassidim, when they came to America, they kept their European dress as a way of, keeping their identity. Clothing is really important to that. Just a little fascinating point about it is that it's very possible that a lot of that clothing was actually Asian and Mongolian. I did some research on that. So like some certain shtreimels are related to Mongolian dress because some of the Polish nobles were obsessed with Asia and Oriental things and were Orientalists, and they just adopted some Asian clothing. So some of the Hasidic clothing is actually Mongolian, apparently, which is really cool.
The Hasidic shtreimels, most people don't know this, but they're actually giant furry hockey pucks.
Yeah, true.
Thank you, Rabbi Tzvi. The next question that came in, sorry about that. Okay, I've just made a note here. Here's a very interesting one. A Christian pastor from Edmonton was handcuffed and jailed today for holding service. He cannot talk to his wife and children. How can Canadians of all faiths fight against the liberal lockdown policies, which are oppressing people of all faiths and preventing them from worshiping together when it's okay to shop at Walmart and Costco, and the majority culture is secular and contemptuous of people of faith.
I think that's
I asked the question, but I'm gonna re-ask the question in a different way. Do you feel like some of the issues that are going on in Quebec, for example, they're allowing cinemas to open with 250 people for winter break, but they're not allowing synagogues that have more than 10 people right now, and even that was something that happened as a result of the Hasidic community making a deal with the Quebec government. So what do you think about, do you feel somewhat
maligned?
Yes, thank you.
Man, a lot of people feel a lot of different ways about this. And I think that, I'm not going to just speak for myself. I just know from my community that a lot of this, whether it's real or not, I don't know if it's real, but this perception of injustice with how things are opening up and, and the priority that's given to, other activities that maybe are more safe or less safe. I know that there's a lot of people who, I don't get upset about it personally. Like me, it's just, it's not something I get upset about. I understand. It's just my perspective. I understand that, there's a very large number of people who, for them, that's their synagogue, is going to a theater. And I respect, and I see the way I see it, we should have somewhat equal, rights to the things that we need, the things that we consider essential. So there are a lot of people in the community who are really kind of upset about perceived injustice. I don't know if it's real or not. I don't know where it's comes from. I know that I'm just the type of person is to say, okay, this is what we have, I'm a little bit more accepting of it, but I would say the majority probably are not, and do perceive some injustice there or some bias having to do with all this history that we talked about and the way religion is looked at in Quebec. I don't know if that's the truth, but those are the opinions.
Mindy, I'd like you to comment on this question as well. And there's another question that came in that's similar to this that was directed at you. Do you feel like the Hasidic community in Outremont has been unjustly targeted during this COVID period?
In a word, yes. I definitely think so. It's a tough one. It's hard. It's hard to be objective about it when you see your community in the news painted in one light, in a very negative manner. The contrast between the headlines when the incident happened at the synagogue a few weeks ago versus when a local school not many blocks away from that synagogue closed down entirely because of COVID cases and variants. Haven't even really seen it in the news, doesn't even make the news because they look like everybody else, whereas we look so different and then are therefore more identifiable and visible. It's difficult. It's also it's a problem of all minorities in such type situations where it's one police identity that is enforcing rules, but they are enforcing rules based on complaints. If somebody calls the complaint, they are obligated to check it out. And what happens when it's part of a minority? Well, that minority is targeted, unfortunately. We've had issues in the spring. We had many issues with people just really constantly calling the police and local security about gatherings of Chasidim when it was just one big family living all together, for example, or one person in a building and 8 police cars showing up. So it's unfortunate, it's sad, it's very difficult and stressful to live. I actually had a perturbing phone call today. A mom called me up and she said that she does not feel safe anymore when she sees a police car. She feels that her children have been severely impacted by this. They come home traumatized if the police showed up at their school. And it's a difficult situation, unfortunately. I mean, ideally the rules should be equal for all, but we know that they're not. The COVID rules do not all necessarily, how should I put it delicately, but some of them seem arbitrary and don't make a lot of sense, but we live in the society where we have to respect what the measures that they pass. If we can fight them, if we can try to negotiate, great. Until then, it's a sort of this is what it is situation.
Thank you. Allison, would you like to answer? Would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it for you? Okay.
You can go ahead and ask it.
Okay, sure. Allison asks, could you please speak more about social capital, especially with respect to the more conservative and religious Hasidic groups, such as the Tush in Beaubriand? How do they perceive social responsibility?
Great question. I do have something coming up on this. I was the last slide or two. I won't get into it now. So going back to the history, right? And you have to relate everything to the history, because when you're trying to preserve, right, the Hasidic community, you know your history, you know where you came from, right? You're holding on to that much more than people do today. I talk to teenagers today. I do bar mitzvah lessons. They don't realize that the cell phone they're holding in their hand that has data and internet anywhere and you can watch a video, like that has only been around for a few years. They think it was always like that. So the historical awareness is just not a thing. But when you are in I find amongst Chasidim, there's a real historical awareness. There's a real strong tradition that's passed down, and part of that is the relationship between Ashkenazi Jews and government for the past 1,000 years. Okay, and that's really the answer to your question. So how would you react if you were used, for everything you're worth, kicked out when they felt like it, brought back in, kicked out, you just used and used and used, usury, okay, there's a pun for you. And, what would you think of government? Well, it's all just pragmatic, right? They don't really care about us. We don't really care about, so we're not going to care about them either. We just use each other. That's our relationship. And there's no social capital there in that 1,000-year-old relationship. It's all just kind of people getting used. And I know, Mindy, as the first Hasidic, female, elected politicians bridging that gap. We see that being worked on. But that stings and it stays. And then, and the Holocaust and communism and Chmielnicki massacres, all the things I mentioned. It's just, there's this feeling that the government uses us, when we're useful, and they can just turn around, like in Budapest. They just turn around. Our neighbors could turn around at any moment and just turn on us and turn us into something. And so when you have that perception, it's really, it creates cynicism. There are no people more sarcastic in the world than the Chassidim. There's my big generalization, right, Mindy? Am I wrong about that? They have an incredible sarcastic sense of humor, right out of the Yiddish books. There's a book you can get, Just Say Nu, Just Say Nu. Amazing book. You can get all the beautiful expressions, incredible, deep, rich, shtech, we call it, insults and cynicism and sarcasm are part of the culture, and people don't realize that. It's a very savvy people who have learned to survive. The Jewish people who have learned to survive this way is not by being unaware of what's going on. It's actually by being quite smart about what's going on. I was going to show some examples from Hasidic news sources. That's my next slide. I'll get a chance to maybe a little later if anyone's interested. That was my last slide, pretty much.
Thank you.
But
I saw you nodding your head in agreement with Rabbi Yosh. Could you add anything to this? Because it is a big question, I think, in the general public. Allison has a great question. How do you perceive and the community perceive social responsibility?
I'll tell you where the question came from. About 20 years ago, I participated, or I listened in on a forum by the Intercultural Institute of Montreal, and it had a panel of representatives from different religious communities living in Montreal, and everybody spoke about their social responsibility. If you're walking down the street and you pass somebody, a Buddhist monk, for example, and they would talk about what his social responsibility would be, and so on and so forth. So with the Hasidic communities living as our neighbors, I was curious to know how the more conservative groups feel interacting, having neighbors. You have answered, the reason I was nodding is that you were answering my question. I was getting a lot of insight from what you were saying, so.
I'll try to add, if I can. I can't speak for the Boisbriand community because I don't come from there. I don't have family there. I don't really have friends there, so I can't really speak on their behalf. I can tell you from my upbringing, how my family and how I was taught to look at social responsibility. Despite never wanting to be a politician, my father and my parents took us to vote at every single election. From a young age, we would all go, would be this big thing. I have this memory of being young and waiting in line to vote and it being a big deal. We would always talk about current events and things happening around the world, you know, at our dinner table. So, you know, I would say that it was at a high level, but it's perhaps not at in the same way that maybe the majority, the secular majority, consider social responsibility. How do we define it? I always ask this question about when people complain that we don't integrate. We're not integrated into Quebecois society. How do you define integration? Do you define it by paying our taxes, by speaking the language, by being, you know, good neighbors, by it's a very broad question. It doesn't have really easy answers. But I think it's a lot on an individual basis. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it's very family based. So these are the values that I was brought up with. But it could be that in some families their values are different. I don't know. But you know, in a general sense, I mean, in terms of social responsibility, we can talk about the concept of tikkun olam, which is to repair the world, and how do we improve our little corner of that. By our actions. So, you know, we have a big responsibility, and I think the expectations of us are always really high, and that's a bit of a problem because when we misbehave or we don't behave in exemplary fashion, the spotlight is that much greater.
Yeah, you know, Mindy, I just want to quickly add something to that, which is so important, is that, you know, it's what I was talking about before about the sarcasm and the cynicism and the history. You know, it shouldn't be there. It's unfortunate because I think you talked about tikkun olam, this idea of repairing the world, this mystical social responsibility, which is part of Hasidic philosophy. And I think that Hasidim have so much to give in terms of social responsibility. You want to talk about social responsibility? Hatzalah, chaverim, okay? Hatzalah, you call, you know, there's a minor medical emergency and you need some help, you call Hatzalah. These guys with, you know, payas, you know, they will show up and they will help. Okay, they're volunteers, and there's incredible stories I've seen on Facebook of them helping an old lady who fell in the street in New York. I mean, it's a huge operation. I mean, they're serious. In New York, they come before the ambulance, and they're real ambulances. My wife had a terrible injury in the subway, and they got there and they helped her. And every time, whenever something goes wrong, I mean, you go for Hatzalah. And I have some YouTube videos I should add to the link page of this guy. Chaverim, your car is locked. Okay, the police, you know, they break the window. Chaverim will come and they have a special device to open it. They'll give you a jump. They come for free. They don't want your money, and they go, and they're just there to help. And it's what an unbelievable social responsibility that Chassidim do amongst, you know, in their areas, and they'll do it for anyone who calls them and asks. These people are just incredible. And they get up in the middle of the night and they run out of their house. They run out in the middle of their family events and they go help people. And it's so beautiful. Imagine we all did that. Imagine everybody did that. So I think it's something major, and they do that for everybody, Jewish and not. So I think it's like a major thing to contribute to social responsibility. And I wish we didn't have so much of this leftover cynicism from our, you know, from our very difficult history.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's a big question, I know. And thank you for sharing. I'm learning a lot.
Thank you, Allison. Rabbi Tzvi, do you want to speak to the Boisbriand, to the Tush community? Since you're very close with them and have a very good, you know a lot of what's going on over there.
Sure, I can talk for like 3,000 people. Not a problem at all. So yeah, I live in NDG. I worked as a journalist. I ran Montreal's, I think, only Yiddish paper at the time for like 4 years. It came out bi-weekly. It was a lot of fun. I got to know people from different communities. I am the same Hasidic style as, I don't know where your screens are, but the guy on my far right, guy on my far left, they're my buddies, and I'm Chabad Lubavitch. So I come from the Westbury area. I was born here. I was raised Chabad. So just a little background about myself. So I know about the communities through mostly my journalism, and also I grew up here and have friends from different communities. Okay, so I mean, Rabbi Yosh spoke beautifully. He really explained it well. I just wanted to add a couple of points. Point number one is mentioning like all the experience and all the history of anti-Semitism and all that, with the government. Point number one is that it kind of still goes on, and I'm talking on the ground. Working in journalism, the reason I initially got into it was because I actually opened a website. I don't want to promote it, I'm not mentioning anything, but I opened a website just for the religious Jewish community's point of view, because a friend of my mom, had an anti-Semitic incident happen to her in Concordia, and she was terrified to go to the media because a lot of religious Jews are under the impression that the media is kind of, again, this may not be necessarily true, but we're typically portrayed negatively. Sorry, I meant the police first and the media. She was terrified to go to the police or the media because of her experiences. She was an older woman. So I wrote out her story. I love writing. And I started a website, and stories came in. And I mean, it's kind of sad because personally, I barely experience anti-Semitism in Montreal, but the stories that come in are like, this is going, it's going on. So I want to go specific to Tush. In Tush, most people don't know this, but almost on I don't know now during the pandemic, but before it, once a week, there's I'm sure they're just kids having fun, but they drive through the town throwing stuff at people walking at night or shouting anti-Semitic comments. Again, it might just be teens having fun, but you could find videos of this on YouTube. I found a video on YouTube of a group of teens in Boisbriand driving by, and they're asking a Hasidic woman in Tush who's walking alone. They're asking her for directions to Hitler Street.
Oh, God.
Yeah, you could find it on YouTube if you search around. And then when she starts trying to run away, they follow her and invite her in the car to come join them in the club. And that's traumatic. So imagine she's going and telling her friends, or if she's comfortable even, but imagine these sort of things that you grew up with. And I'm going to say again, in Montreal, I haven't experienced that much, but you definitely do as a religious Jew, with his beard. They're like, either he's Muslim or he's really Jewish. And when I got like these strings poking out of my pants, I occasionally do get some comments. So that's just, the experience is kind of like an us against everybody, especially when you're in an insular community like Tush. So when you're in Tush and you're asking about the social responsibility, there's the history, there's the regular stories that you're hearing, and then there's and then there's also, and this goes in general, there's also this idea of like, we're not the kind of people who really commit much crime. We just, like Rabbi Yosh mentioned, Hatzalah and Chaverim, two organizations. These are volunteer organizations. When Hasidic Jews are bored, they join these volunteer organizations where it's like, all right, you're going to become a paramedic, and anytime someone needs help, we'll clue you in. You're part of an exclusive group, and that's why in NDG in our synagogue, maybe 4 years ago, a woman had what was it? She had a reaction to she had some peanut butter and she was allergic. We called it was Shabbat, Saturday. We called Hatzalah. First we called 911, and then we called Hatzalah. I believe that, and we're far away from the religious community. I believe that they arrived either at the same time. That means they drove from all the way down. The people who came, I know them. They're from Westbury area. They drove 20 minutes and they arrived before the ambulance. Imagine if you're living in that area. This is something in general Montreal and the world should take from Hasidic Jews. So the idea is we're maybe not. I'm saying from their angle, I see it as like maybe we're not contributing to society. Maybe we're not part of society. We're our own little society, but we do contribute somewhat, and we're not hurting anyone. In fact, we make the areas we live in safer. So that's those are my comments.
Thank you.
NDG rocks, folks.
Two things real quick, if I can. First, I'd just like to say that you were talking about experiencing anti-Semitism. The things that we heard in the 1991 film that Rabbi Yosha played before, and that he was absolutely shocked by, those are things that I have heard in the past few years. They are not things that were said once upon a time. They are still being said today and still being felt by a lot of people. And I think I'm curious that it would be interesting to do a study on this, but I feel like in the NDG community, or the Westbury community, the demographics among the general population are different than they are in Uxmal, and I believe that plays into how we in Uxmal are perceived by the media and the rest of society as well. I think that it is a much more mixed neighborhood. There's a lot of different communities living in those areas. And it creates it sort of dilutes that in the sense of like, well, everyone is different. There's so many different communities around here. So these Jews act XYZ or do this or look like that. Whereas in Uxmal, the differences are perhaps more stark. We do not have as many diverse communities.
Yeah, Rabbi, there's a question from Madame Sue Montgomery, which I think is interesting.
I was going to get to it. I was trying to get her to put her video on, but our mayor is off. She's already late for her, so I'm not going to put her on the spot. Oh, there she is. There she is.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay, we're going to get her on here. I didn't want to put you on the spot there, but we're really happy that you're with us. Thank you for being here, and I know you have some questions, so please.
No, I wrote it in. Hi, everyone. This has been very interesting, and I'm lying in bed. Okay, so I'll just be honest.
I am too.
Nobody record.
But who cares, But at least I am dressed. I'm not in my pajamas. What was I going to say? Yeah, so I wrote my question in the chat. I'm just wondering what kind of challenges you face or the community faces with the younger generations. You were saying they all have their cell phones and like all our kids, and it's a challenge for all parents to shield their kids from what's going on in the world. And so I wonder if there's any, do you have any sort of pushback or rebels who just say, we're not interested in this. We want to, I don't know, we want to go out and become rappers or something. I don't know. Sure. So I'm just wondering, I'd like you to talk about those challenges.
Sure. Can I start with that one? Is that okay, guys? So I work in a school. A few things. So number one, this is a cultural thing among the Polish and Hungarian Chasidim, as opposed to, let's say, Lubavitch and Lubavitch Chasidim, Westbury Chasidim, it's a little more okay to play around with your clothes. So if you're starting to feel like you want to assimilate a little more, you want to be a little bit more part of Western society, you might change, you might drop the the jacket, you might wear a colored shirt. It's not a big deal, he's got a colored shirt, there he changed the uniform, nobody cares, doesn't matter. But the culture in Uxmal, that Hasidic community, it's a big deal. The clothes is a really big deal. And so it's important to know when you look at somebody and they look a certain way, you have no idea what that person is like on the inside, because the clothes is just a uniform. For them, it's a big deal. So I know people, it's a very big deal to change the clothes. Okay. So it's the last thing to happen. So the person you're looking at, they might be a holy person who sits in the synagogue and prays and studies all day. They might be a business person. They might be having an affair. And I'm talking from experience. They, officially your question was about the internet. They might have their kosher phone. You're only allowed to, there's this idea of a kosher phone, a phone that can't surf the web in a way that could become bad. And then they might have a second phone that nobody knows about, right? You don't know. There's so much going on underneath the surface. That person, might be a rapper already. and they don't look like it. They might love rap. They might be listening to gangster rap on their headphones where no one can see. You have no idea. And I'm talking about people I've met, people I know. They look a certain way, and they are really diverse and interesting. And you don't really know until you get, until, you know, yeah. And it's because the community has a certain pressure to look a certain way. As long as you look the parts, then it's okay. And, you know, you don't know who you're talking to. And yeah, with the phones, I mean, work in a school and I overhear the kids. I even heard it today. I overhear the kids. Oh, my parents think I don't know their password for their tablet. Oh, I wake up in the middle of the night and I just watch, you know, whatever I want. Yeah, I hear kids talking about this. I'm in the school. I'm thinking, oh my God, do I tell their parents? You know, I don't even know that, you know, I just overhear things, you know, kids talking to each other in the hallway because I'm in my little office. And yeah, if you have the internet at home, you know, your kids will eventually get to it. So the philosophy in Outremont is more not to have the internet at home. And that was a big challenge for schooling during COVID. A lot of people don't have internet. I think, yeah, they did on the phone. Amongst, I think, Lubavitch Chassidim, it's a little bit more accepted, more common to have internet at home. It's very common. And but we have filters and we have special, you know, we have a special streaming service that actually Tzvi works for and creates content for. That's, you know, 100% kosher content for children, kind of like a little Netflix, but for Jewish kids, for Hasidic kids. And, you know, we have our little walled garden, let's call it, on the internet that we try to keep to. But influences creep in, and that's normal. And so we try to teach our kids to become educated consumers and to be, you know, our philosophy is teach, you know, make the kid into the person who's going to make the right choice, because you're not going to always be there to make the choice for them. So that's our educational philosophy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. We have
All
right. I can add to that.
Oh,
sorry. I could just add to that. I'm dealing with one of my kids right now. He's online, and I'm sure I'm not the only parent dealing with this, but he's online. We let him watch videos. You know, we let him watch kids Netflix and stuff, but he also has email, and he's come across some porn, and we're dealing with that. So you know, it's just like regular other parents, I'm sure, deal with.
Laying it all out there.
Oh yeah. Let me bare my soul to all of you strangers.
I just want to add something. It's actually kind of funny because one of the we talk a lot about misconceptions on both sides, and one of the misconceptions that I had on the general society was that everyone had a TV at home. When I got to know Lila, who is with us tonight, she's participating in the comments of the chat. When I met Lila, I was shocked that she didn't have a TV at home. She told me that she chose to bring up her daughter without that influence. And to me, that was like, wow, okay, so it's not just us that can make that choice. I think everyone makes that choice based on, you know, their personal values and everything. Hi, Khani.
Hi, everyone. I was behind the screen. Now I'm in the screen.
We heard you. Now we see you. Thank you for being here.
She thinks you couldn't hear her. Yeah. Okay.
I wonder, may I
honestly,
comment?
I thought that was like the voice of God.
It basically is. It's the same thing.
Carly has a question. We'll bring her up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Also, just for having this today, I think this is really incredible. I heard about it on the radio this morning and I just thought, oh my goodness, I want to listen in. But like some of the others have done, maybe I should give you a little background about myself so that you can put my comment into perspective. I'll try to say quickly. I'm originally from the United States, actually, well, from Vermont. And but then I lived in Germany and I've lived in Russia and the Czech Republic and various places in my 20s and in my 30s. And at some point I decided, I was living in Switzerland and I decided I needed to move somewhere to live forever. And so I chose Montreal. And one of the reasons I chose Montreal was because it was just so diverse. And actually, as a tourist coming here, I felt so welcoming. It was very interesting. And I also felt that it was very close to my own culture, but at the same time, you know, I had French and I had, you know, lots of different things. So that's what attracted me to Montreal. But so now I moved here. I have a family. I've been here since 2007. I'm Canadian now. Phew, thank goodness. But also I have pretty, oh, I'm sorry, your children are here making noises.
We love it.
I have to say, thank you. I don't have any religion. I grew up kind of without religion, though I grew up with, my family was of Christian background, my, grandparents and things like this. And and I also don't know a lot about Judaism, but I'm interested also because of where I was in Europe and, heard so many things. But mostly I'm interested in world peace, and I'm interested in peace in the community. I'm interested in peace in Canada and in Quebec. And so when we look at these issues, I also think I'm horrified when I hear that the young people of today, the young people know so little about history, or some, for example, say the Holocaust, they don't know what it is. They don't even know what it is, or they don't believe that it happened. Or I am absolutely shocked by this. So what I would say also, not specifically to your community, but maybe to the rest of the community of the Quebecois as a whole, or even Canadians as a whole, I recommend foreign exchange, because this is an experience that I had, and it gives you just a totally different outlook on the world. So then if you have the experience of being the outsider somewhere and of trying to integrate somewhere because you have to, or learning another language, or being the one who can't understand, or is just different all the time, then you appreciate what that's like for everyone else who has that experience. And then if you come home, then you also realize, gosh, these people who I thought were different from me, we actually still have so much in common, because we are from Montreal, because we are Canadian, because we're Quebecers, any of that. But also just that you gain empathy also when you go somewhere else. So I would really be a proponent of foreign exchange, because people go, they come back, they learn that everyone around the world is different, and that there's value in everyone and in the different cultures. And so that's what I would say. And thank you for holding this, and please hold more and tell more people.
Yeah, Carly, I agree with you 100% about foreign exchange. It's in the Lubavitch Hasidic subculture, it's kind of a rite of passage, because we have this international presence. Everybody needs to go away for a year, if not more. My first cousin, he always been to, quite a few
my
continents.
brother went to France, South
India,
Africa,
Passover in
Venezuela.
Venezuela. I did my year in Berlin. My wife did her year in Australia and Tasmania. And this,
Wow.
it's like super, it's just, that's how we operate. It's really nice. And
but it's just our Hasidic group.
Well, it's
not common at all.
It's a Lubavitch culture thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But one of the there's one thing you mentioned about having that experience of being having to integrate and being a minority. Sometimes, and something I was thinking about before this class, and thinking about, and this was mentioned in the comments, in the discussion about the history of French Canada. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes, it's really common, okay, when somebody has been a minority and they've been somewhat, abused, a second-class citizen or whatever by the majority, and we think that we're going to spread out the political power, everything's going to become better, right? Because after all, they're not. Very often, what happens is that they will do what was done to them. Okay,
right.
I was just reading about what's happening in Myanmar, and there's a big element of that going on. There's a very complicated ethnic. We think this is complicated. I mean, that's a really complicated situation. There's so much going on with, this ethnic infighting and the army, and it has to do with, the majority finally taking control from the army and having democracy, and then maybe misusing that power. And then it's like, I'm not going to get into that. It's but like it's very common. I've seen Chasidim make this mistake.
There's a lot in common with French, Quebecois.
Chasidim. Exactly.
If they would see
somebody said
what
that
they
in the
have
comments.
more in common than their differences,
a lot in common.
they might lead to more understanding.
I actually think that I see in French Quebecois culture that it's also very insular, and they're doing the same thing that Chasidim are trying to do. They have the laws,
they just look,
and there's an insularness.
They just don't look different.
They don't look, but it's a language thing. There's this insularness that and laws to protect the language to try to preserve the culture, and that's something that we should understand very well each other on. And unfortunately, what happens is that and I've seen Chasidim make the same mistake too. I've seen in certain areas of New York, Chasidim gain political power, and then they don't respect the non-Jewish minority properly, and it comes back to, and
Can I just say
and it
something?
doesn't go well. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say that I relate a lot to like Muslim women just from the modesty perspective, you know, like on the one hand, what's going on in the Middle East is very much against Jews, but someone.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
On the one hand, it's like very against Jews, but on the other hand, we have a lot in common with our modesty and our way of dressing and our pride in it. So, you know, like once you see it that way, I don't look at, you know, Muslim women as being that different than me, except that, you know, we have different, you know, practices.
But yeah, but they're very similar, yeah, in a lot of ways. So thank you for your beautiful comments, Carly, and so glad you joined us from the radio thing this morning. That was so nice. And yeah, I think there was also somebody else who wanted to ask that question, Rabbi.
I didn't see any other hands raised, but I have a question that came in from Liz.
Liz, yes.
She asked, I'm a secular history teacher at a Hasidic girls' school, and I'm concerned about the rise in far-right views both in Quebec and in the wider world. How could we as non-Jews be good allies to counter these views and answer well to those who use the othering statements of they? What a fantastic question.
Yeah, that's really cuts down to the essence of what we're trying to do here.
Mindy, do you want to start with that one?
I don't have any magic answers, unfortunately. I would say keep doing what you're doing, calling out such comments, you know, questioning them further. Why do they believe that the way that they do? Having these discussions does take a lot of energy, so you got to be careful with that. But they can actually change people's perspectives on things. So it's having conversations with people. In terms of what we see on social media, it's also if people feel comfortable, you know, saying certain things on that could be helpful in so far as being allies. But I don't have any magic answers.
Maybe I'll dip into it for a second. So there's a class, I just gave it for the second time for college students online. I call a class I designed called the Kabbalah and Western Civilization. And where we look at the Kabbalistic view on the Jewish people, Ashkenazi Jewish history and Western civilization, and how that's worked together. And a big part of that is what you're talking about. What we call today far right views, what we call today white supremacy, is actually just the status quo. Okay, let's really be clear about that. If we let's open our perspective, let's look at the past 1,000 years, 15, that's what we call white supremacy and far right views, is the way that was the view of the majority of people for a long time. Slavery was normal, right? All these things.
Lower class.
What we have today, that Nazism, you know, Nazism during World War II was very popular in North America. Okay, the KKK. It's not just the KKK. FDR, President of the United States. Race, you know, serious racism. Mackenzie King. None is too many. There was like, you know, far right views were not just in Nazi Germany. They were here, and they've been here, and they were always here, and they're still here, and they're the status quo. The fact that we have gotten away from that is a relatively new development. It's been like that for 1,000 years, and we've had 50 or 60 years of getting away from that, because World War II finally, okay, and then it's coming back. We're forgetting World War II. World War II finally, like, okay, you know, we're not doing that anymore. But it is and it's not something that you can just, you know, call out. You know, calling out is important, but white supremacy and what I teach in this class is that it has a very big foundation of ideas. It's not just something that somebody made up in their basement. It's got 1,000 years of history. It is a very, very deep idea, and you have to take it seriously. You have to study it. The people who hate Jews know more about Jews than Jews do. Okay, and I prove this to my students. I pull off things from 8chan, like the most disgusting stuff that inspired the guy who shot the, you know, a gun in the Chabad of Poway, you know, that website where the discussions going on there. And I'm like, you guys don't even understand what they're talking about, do you? Right? They know more. They're talking about Jews, like they're using their, you know, slang and like they're talking about things that most people don't even know about. They know their stuff. The guy who shot up Chabad of Poway, in, you know, that's in California a few years ago, Rabbi Goldstein, you know, and that whole, you know, he was a very smart guy, and he thought he was doing the right thing. He was a, a piano player and an art in a church, going to church, and he was like, nice fellow on the surface. He got convinced by ideas, and if we're going to unconvince people of those ideas, we need to understand those ideas. We need to understand where they're coming from, and we need to, hit them at the basis of those ideas, which is much deeper than most of us, give it credit for. You have to really know it. You have to really understand it before you can fight it, is what I think.
I like to add one thing. You can justify anything in the name of anything. And so because of that, I think it's events like these, and it's the ability, if you have someone who comes to you and uses the word they, any of the people who are here answering questions tonight will be very happy to have a conversation with anyone who wants to have a conversation. And I think the moment it goes from a they to a real conversation, this is not the they, this is the person. Look, here I am in the flesh and blood. I'll Zoom chat anybody who wants to. I'll FaceTime anyone who wants to and have a real conversation with them. And then it's not they anymore, it's a real person. And I think that's what inspired us to be here. And I think that's what inspired you to be here, each one of us. And I think it's a really, really powerful part of our society is that we do live in a mosaic, and we do live in a multicultural society, and we do have access to all types of people from all faiths and from all worlds. And okay, there's funny things going on in the chat.
Yeah, by the way, this is just important. We had one troll tonight, only one, and she was so much fun. Thank you, Judith, for being our troll. If you're still here, I really appreciated it. I love you. You're great. And one thing you got 100, I agree with you 100% right, that if you want to dig into Hasidic culture and you want to get it, and there's this show on Netflix called Shtisel. I just added it as a link into the link documents. Sorry, and the season 3 is coming out.
Yeah.
Season 1 and 2 were such masterpieces. I don't even want season 3 because I don't want them to ruin the ending. Shtisel is a masterpiece.
It's no longer on Netflix.
No, are you serious?
No.
Sweet, don't say that. I still see it here, or maybe it's American Netflix.
It's
Oh
.com.
no. Okay.
Okay, but there's got to be other places to watch it.
Find a way, okay, by hook or by crook, find a way to watch Shtisel. And
It's the reason why Israel shut down their airport, too many protests.
Okay. Anyway, it's an incredible TV show, and it's the perspective is really right. Another popular show is Unorthodox, which I haven't seen, but I've read a lot about it. And Unorthodox, I think was it technically, I think Unorthodox was like probably very well done. I think it was really good drama. The problem with it is that it's essentially fiction.
I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it.
I don't recommend it. Well,
I forget about the
It's just not a truth.
outside of the storyline. It's not as true to the community as Shtisel is. There's no.
Yeah, I know it's fiction, but
there's another question that came in, and I came in a few times, but I don't really understand it. Vivken and Ian, can you unmute yourself and explain the question, because I think it'll be better coming from you, even if you don't put on video, just audio is fine. We'd love to hear the question.
Hello.
Hi.
So the question is, especially as I've seen the discussion here and some earnest speaking about that divide at times, I see reflection in, at times, I grew up in Chassidim as well.
Oh, wow.
How the general jury will sometimes treat the Hasidic community, reflected in how my community as a Hindu sometimes treats the Society of Krishna, the Hare Krishna.
Right.
But I've seen progress in your community in bridging that divide. And I was wondering what tools you've seen used in your community to do that I can bring to my community.
Wow.
What kind of successes, what you've seen have had success that we can bridge our own community's divide?
What a great question.
So how do we bridge within here within Jews, how do we bridge from that's wow, let me take a second here.
What lessons we can learn from your community to apply to our own?
Yeah, I think I read this book, a sociological study, of the Lubavitch community in the 1970s. And one of the things, he talked about this, and I know this from my own life, is, as a somebody, the Chabad way, coffee, Danish, and chit chat, that is very important.
It is true. It's true.
Yeah. And the number, when you're a counterculture, so maybe that's what there's in common, right? So this is a Jewish counterculture, right? The number one thing is you have to, find something that you have in common, find something to connect on, and you start there, and be ready to teach and clarify and explain who you are and what you do and why, without trying to proselytize, right? When the second somebody thinks that they're being proselytized to, they shut down. They're not listening anymore. And food is really important, like the comments are saying, 100%. Food is key.
Bring the cultural
But
yummy food that you
bring
have.
bring your, if you have your own unique food, bring it. But try to have a conversation, just kind of explaining, this is what we do, this is what we offer, and it's here for you if you want it, and we're here for you, and this is what we can offer you. This is our social capital that we're ready to invest in the wider community. And the second, anytime that's done, the way I see that most prominently in Utramal is, Hatzalah and Chaverim, just the incredible work that they do, helping people in a very material way. In my own community in Lubavitch, it's spiritual and physical, but mainly spiritual. Our outreach centers,
Mada.
Mada, the food bank. There's so many. I mean, there's the drug rehab and something I didn't mention, Refuah v'Chesed. Okay, what an amazing story. No, it's we're talking within the Jewish community. I have an uncle who has passed away a few years ago, and he was an amazing guy. My father's brother, never got married, never had kids, had a really hard life. I think he suffered a lot from mental illnesses. It was great. He was a really interesting person. And he, there was this thing he left in his will, he leaving the money behind and his investments and whatever. And then it's like, oh, you don't give it to any religious organization. Like that's the kind of attitude that he had, do not give it to the Conservative Party of Canada, and don't give the money that I'm leaving you to any kind of religious organization, and definitely not to Chabad, right? And and then when he was sick, and then he, and the Refuah v'Chesed organization, how do you, when you're sick and you can't get down the stairs, how do you get to your doctor's appointments? He had a throat cancer. How do you get to the hospital? He had the guys with payas, Chasidim coming from Montreal and carrying him down the stairs. And then he was like, oh my God, I really misjudged this. And he made that change. And he said, you can give, you can donate the money I leave you guys to a religious organization. We actually, in the basement of Chabad and DG, we have, it's still being worked on. It got interrupted by COVID, is my Uncle Leo's Judaica, our little future cafe, secondhand bookstore, God willing, that really, that comes from that. It's a really cool thing. And that changed, that if you want, sorry, I forgot your name, the person who asked that question, but, that giving back changed his perspective and became much more accepting.
Yeah, it's getting late already, and it's been really amazing. Maybe we'll take one more question. Does anybody want to unmute themselves? Have one last question for the evening before we close this fantastic panel? Not everybody at once. I thank you for all the nice thank yous that you're leaving in the comments. It really warms all of our hearts. It really does.
Rebelech and Rebbetzins.
I want to know what Zvi is eating.
I want to say one thing.
Zvi, don't.
Wait, I want to know.
Eric, the troll has arrived. Yes.
One thing, it's very important that most of you already
Eric,
know.
if you're going to talk, you got to turn on your video.
Turn on your video while listening.
You definitely don't want. It's a long day. The point being is there's an old
Are you eating? No. He's eating the plate of charm that they gave in Bnei Barak before taking the so you can take the vaccine. By the way, they did it in a lot of communities. They gave in Petah Tikva, Russian kind of food to attract all the people to come and, you know, have the vaccine done. We call it a jab in London. And they, yeah, and in every community in Israel, they were serving different kinds of foods. So I think, so you're eating something over there that you
They're
don't want to
basically
share
saying
with
that
us.
they're going to serve poutine to get me to vaccinate.
I do chilling for a
Down
shot
for
in the
that.
arm any
Down
day.
for that.
Okay.
Sweet
Let's have the
correction, the
vaccines here.
shtisel is,
We'll
the
serve-
seasoning of shtisel is already on, and I already watched the whole series.
How do you get it?
Number
How do you
3.
get season 3 of Shtisel?
Hi,
Tell us your
Sue,
secret.
how are
The 3
you?
shtisel is already, I
Anyone
already
watching,
watched
Eric?
all 9 episodes. It's
I
done.
said, Sue, I miss you.
Oh.
Oh, that's so nice.
Hey, you should do this more often. It's very interesting.
I miss you too, Elka. I haven't seen you in ages.
I know.
Well, I haven't
know.
seen anyone in ages. What am I
Well,
saying?
maybe we could meet for a plate of challenge one day.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all very much. It
Yeah,
was
have a
really
good
great
night.
evening.
Have a good night.
Thank you everyone for
Night.
being here.
Good night, everybody. So nice
Good
to
night.
Have a
see
good
you.
night.
well.
You.
Bye. Didn't you have things you wanted to still talk about?
Okay.
Okay, now let's talk about all the people who left.
Thank you so much. All these really nice comments. Isn't this amazing? All these nice comments. Everybody's really.
Honey, what was interesting is that the thing stayed framed around you and Josh, even when you and Yosh, even when you weren't talking anymore.
Well, because they're pinned. They're pinned. That's why.
Yeah.
No. I see
Josh
three people
managing it.
pinned right now, but the fluorescent thing stayed around them the whole time.